I still remember the sound of my tires crunching over the snow that night, the way my hands trembled on the steering wheel, and how my heart kept telling me something was wrong long before my eyes could see it. I hadn't planned to come by unannounced. A mother knows when she's not wanted, even by her own child. My daughter, Emily, had been distant for months, short phone calls, polite excuses, that careful tone people use when they're hiding something they don't want you to ask about. Still, it was Christmas Eve, and I couldn't bear the thought of her spending it without at least a proper hug from her old mother. So, I packed a small tin of cookies, wrapped a knitted scarf I'd made with my arthritic hands, and drove the 2 hours through falling snow to her husband's family estate. They called it a lodge, but it was more mansion than home, perched proudly at the edge of a frozen lake, glowing warmly against the dark winter sky. I parked farther down the drive than I should have. Their driveway was already crowded with luxury cars, and I didn't want to draw attention. That should have been my first warning. As I stepped out of the car, the cold cut through my coat like a knife. I pulled my scarf tighter and began walking toward the house when I heard it. A soft, broken sound. Not laughter, not music, crying. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A small, shaky breath, the kind that comes when someone is trying not to sob. "Hello," I called, my voice thin in the freezing air. That's when I saw her. She was sitting on the stone steps beside the house, half hidden behind a tall column. My daughter, my Emily, curled into herself, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her thin sweater dusted with snow. No coat, no blanket. Her hair was damp, frozen at the ends. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. Then she looked up. "Mom," she whispered, as if saying my name might break something fragile. I dropped everything. The cookies hit the ground. The scarf slipped from my hands. I crossed the distance between us without feeling my legs move and wrapped her in my arms. She was ice cold. Not just cold, dangerously cold. "Why are you out here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was splitting open. She shook her head. It's fine. I didn't want to cause a scene." Those words hurt more than the cold ever could. From inside the house, warm golden light spilled through tall windows. I could hear laughter, glasses clinking. Someone turned up the music, cheerful, loud, careless. I smelled roasted meat, cinnamon, wine. Christmas was happening inside. My daughter was freezing outside. I pressed my forehead to hers, my anger rising slowly, dangerously calm. I had spent my life staying quiet, staying polite, staying grateful for whatever scraps of kindness were offered. But as I held my shivering child in my arms, I realized something had shifted. I stood up, lifting her with me. "Stay with me," I said softly. "I'm going inside." And as I reached for the door, I knew whatever waited on the other side of it would change this family forever. The door felt heavier than it should have when I pushed it open, as if the house itself was resisting me. Warm air rushed out, thick with the smell of pine, spice, and expensive perfume. Laughter burst against my ears, sharp, careless laughter, the kind that belongs to people who have never had to worry about the cold. A dozen faces turned toward us at once, their smiles still frozen in place, glasses hovering midair. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. I stepped inside, my arms still wrapped tightly around Emily. Her body shivered against mine, and that alone was enough to steady me. The fire in the massive stone fireplace crackled loudly, throwing orange light across polished wood floors and perfectly decorated tables. Stockings hung neatly along the mantel, each one embroidered with a name. I scanned them. There was one for my son-in-law, Daniel, one for his parents, one for his brother, even one for the dog. There was none for my daughter. Margaret, Daniel's mother, finally said, her voice thin with surprise. You didn't tell us you were coming." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her pearls, her silk blouse, her manicured hands wrapped around a glass of champagne. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." Emily tried to pull away from me. "Mom, please," she murmured. "It's okay. I tightened my grip. "No, sweetheart, you won't." Daniel appeared from behind the crowd then, his face tightening the moment he saw us. His eyes flicked from Emily's pale cheeks to her trembling hands, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw guilt. But it vanished quickly. "What's going on?" he asked, forcing a smile. "Why are you making a scene?" The word scene echoed in my head. I took a slow breath. "I found my daughter outside," I said, "freezing, alone, while you all celebrate Christmas in here." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else laughed nervously, as if this were an awkward misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a joke. Daniel's father waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that. She just needed a little air. Young people get emotional during the holidays." Emily flinched. I felt something inside me harden. "She didn't have a coat," I said, "or a blanket, or even shoes warm enough for this weather." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, you're exaggerating. Emily can be dramatic. She didn't want to join us, so we gave her space." I looked down at my daughter. Her lips were blue. Her fingers clutched my coat like a lifeline. "This isn't space," I said. "This is cruelty." The room fell silent again, heavier this time. The fire crackled loudly, filling the gap no one dared to step into. Daniel leaned closer to me and lowered his voice. "Please don't do this here. You'll embarrass everyone." I met his eyes, calm as a winter lake. "You should be embarrassed," I replied. That's when his mother's smile disappeared entirely, and I realized this wasn't the first time they'd pushed my daughter into the cold. And as Emily whispered, "Mom, this happens a lot. I knew this night." I didn't answer right away. I just held my daughter tighter and listened to the fire crackle behind us, mocking the quiet that had settled over the room. This happens a lot. Emily's words kept repeating in my mind, each one landing heavier than the last. How often? I asked softly. She hesitated, then shrugged in that way children do when they're trying to make something painful sound small. Whenever I say the wrong thing, or if I cry, or if I make things uncomfortable. Daniel shifted on his feet. She's sensitive, he said quickly. We all have to walk on eggshells around her. I looked at him then, really looked. The smooth confidence in his posture, the way he stood closer to his parents than to his wife, the way his hand never once reached for Emily. Sensitive people feel pain more clearly, I said. That doesn't make them the problem. His mother scoffed. Margaret, you raised her to be like this, always needing reassurance, always expecting special treatment. I felt a slow burn rise in my chest, not explosive, but steady and dangerous. I raised her to believe she deserves kindness, I replied, especially in her own home. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Please, Mom, I didn't want this. They said if I caused trouble, Christmas would be ruined. And whose Christmas were you protecting? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I guided her to the couch nearest the fire and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders myself. No one offered to help. No one moved to make space. They just watched, like spectators at a play that had taken a turn they hadn't rehearsed. Daniel's father cleared his throat. Let's all calm down. We're family. I laughed then, one short, humorless sound. Family doesn't leave one of its own outside in the cold. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Emily could have come back in any time. Could she? I asked, turning to her. She shook her head slowly. They locked the door. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's mother looked away first. His brother stared into his drink. Daniel said nothing at all. I stood up. Emily, go get your coat. We're leaving. Daniel stepped forward. You're not taking her anywhere. This is her home. I faced him, every year of my life standing behind me like armor. A home is a place where you are safe. This is not that. Emily hesitated, torn between fear and relief. I saw the weight she carried, the years of swallowing her voice to keep peace that was never really hers. Mom, she whispered, what if they get angry? I brushed her hair back gently. Let them. Because as I looked around that glowing room, I realized something terrible and true. They had mistaken her silence for consent, and I was done being quiet too. I could feel their anger before they spoke it. It hung in the air like smoke, thick, choking, impossible to ignore. Daniel stepped in front of the door. You're not leaving like this, he said, his voice low, controlled in that way that always pretends to be reasonable. You're embarrassing everyone. Emily's fingers tightened around my sleeve. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know. Move, I said. His mother stood up abruptly. Margaret, this is absurd. You barge into our home on Christmas, make a scene, And now you want to take my daughter-in-law away like she's some child. I met her gaze. If you didn't want to be judged, you shouldn't have put her outside in the cold. She chose to leave the room, she snapped. We didn't exile her. You locked the door, I reminded her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Daniel's father tried a different approach. Let's talk about this tomorrow. Emotions are high. It's Christmas Eve. Exactly, I said. And this is how you treat her on the one night that's supposed to be warm. Emily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to sit by the fire. No one answered her. That silence, so practiced, so familiar, hit me harder than any shouting could have. I stepped closer to Daniel. You promised to protect her, I said quietly. That was your job the moment you married her. He looked past me, toward the tree, toward the glasses of champagne. She makes things difficult, he muttered. You don't know what it's like. I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear me. I know exactly what it's like. I lived with a man who learned how to hurt without leaving bruises, and I stayed far longer than I should have. His eyes flickered. Emily's did too. I straightened. And I won't watch my daughter repeat my mistakes. Daniel exhaled sharply. If she leaves now, don't expect things to be the same. I nodded. Good. Emily looked up at me, startled. Mom, sometimes, I said gently, the only way things change is by refusing to go back to the way they were. I took her hand. She stood slowly, like someone stepping onto thin ice. Her knees shook, but she stood anyway. Daniel didn't move. We walked around him. No one stopped us. At the door, Emily paused and turned back. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, because that's what she'd been trained to do. Instead, she said, I hope one day you understand what you did. Her voice didn't tremble. That was new. Outside, the cold bit at our faces, but somehow it felt easier to breathe. Snow crunched under our shoes as we reached my car. Emily let out a shaky breath. I don't know where to go. I squeezed her hand. You're coming with me. She nodded, tears finally spilling. I'm scared. I know, I said, but fear isn't the worst thing. As I started the engine, I glanced back at the house, at the glowing windows, the perfect picture of warmth and celebration. And I knew deep in my bones that this was only the beginning, because families like that don't let control slip away quietly. And neither, it seemed. That night, sleep never really came. Emily lay curled on the couch in my old living room, wrapped in every blanket I owned, while I sat in the armchair across from her, listening to the house breathe. The ticking clock, the hum of the heater, familiar sounds that once meant safety, and now felt like a fragile promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I ruined Christmas, she whispered into the dark. I didn't answer right away. I'd learned over the years that rushing to comfort sometimes silences truths that need to be spoken. No, I finally said. Christmas was already ruined. You just survived it. She turned her face toward me, Her eyes were red, swollen, exhausted. They'll say I overreacted, that you overstepped. Daniel always says I'm too sensitive. That word, sensitive, made something old and sharp stir in my chest. They always do, I said, because if they admit you were mistreated, they'd have to admit who they are. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question I'd been bracing for. Did I do the right thing? I stood, walked over, and tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders like I used to when she was small. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel brave in the moment, I said. Sometimes it feels like terror. She let out a shaky laugh that quickly turned into a sob. I held her then, really held her, and felt how thin she'd become, how tense her body stayed, even in my arms. That was when I knew this wasn't just about one night or one Christmas. This had been happening for a long time. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains, pale and uncertain. Emily was still asleep when my phone buzzed. Daniel. I didn't answer. A message followed, then another. Short at first, polite. Let's talk. Then sharper. You had no right. Finally, the one that made my hands go cold. If she doesn't come home today, there will be consequences. I stared at the screen, a strange calm settling over me. I'd seen this before, the moment when control feels threatened and the mask begins to slip. I typed back slowly. She's safe. She'll reach out when she's ready. Almost instantly, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then the phone rang again. I turned it off. When Emily woke, she looked lighter somehow, still fragile, but less folded in on herself. They'll be angry, she said, as if reading my thoughts. Yes, I replied. And they'll try to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. She hesitated. What if they come here? I met her gaze. Then they'll deal with me. We spent the day quietly. Soup on the stove, old photo albums on the table. At one point, she smiled at a picture of herself at 6 years old, missing 2 front teeth. I forgot I used to laugh like that, she said softly. That broke my heart more than anything else. By evening, the doorbell rang. My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. Through the frosted glass, I could see a familiar silhouette. Daniel hadn't come alone, and as I reached for the door, one thought rang clear in my mind. Whatever was coming next, they were done pretending. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there with my hand resting on the knob, listening to the weight of the moment. The house felt smaller somehow, like it was holding its breath with me. From behind the door, I could hear muffled voices, Daniel's low and impatient, another sharper, clipped with irritation. His mother. I exhaled slowly and opened the door. They stood there dressed like nothing had happened. Winter coats pressed and neat, faces carefully arranged into something that was meant to look reasonable. Concerned, respectable. The kind of faces people wear when they want the world on their side. Where is she? Daniel asked immediately, his eyes scanning past me into the house. She's resting, I said, keeping my voice even. "You're not coming in." His mother let out a tight laugh. "This is ridiculous. Families argue. That doesn't mean you steal someone's wife in the middle of the night." I felt my spine straighten. "I didn't steal anyone. I brought my daughter home." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mom, please. This is between Emily and me." "No," I replied. "It stopped being private the moment you left her outside in the cold." His mother's smile slipped, just for a second, long enough to tell me I'd hit something true. "She misunderstood," she said quickly. "We were all drinking. The fire was going. She said she needed air." "In below freezing weather," I answered, "without a coat or shoes." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I looked straight at him then, not as his mother-in-law, not as an intruder, but as a woman who had lived long enough to recognize cruelty dressed up as inconvenience. "You didn't call for her," I said. "You didn't check on her. You let your family laugh while my child shook outside." His mother's voice sharpened. "Watch your tone." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't get to lecture me about tone after what you allowed." That's when Emily appeared at the end of the hallway. She looked small in the doorway, wrapped in a sweater that used to be mine. But her chin was lifted. Her eyes were clear. Daniel's face changed instantly, softened. "Em, come on. Let's go home. This has gone far enough." Emily didn't move. "This is my home," she said quietly, "and I'm staying here for now." His mother scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." Emily flinched. I stepped slightly in front of her without thinking. "She's not dramatic," I said. "She's finally being heard." Daniel's patience snapped. "You're poisoning her against us." "No," I replied. "Your behavior did that." He looked at Emily again, frustration creeping into his voice. "If you don't come back tonight, you're choosing this." She swallowed hard. "I know." Silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, his mother straightened her coat. "Fine," she said coldly, "but don't expect us to tolerate lies." Daniel lingered a moment longer, eyes searching Emily's face for something, obedience maybe. When he didn't find it, he turned and walked away. The door closed behind them with a quiet finality. Emily sank onto the couch, trembling. "They're going to punish me," she whispered. I knelt in front of her and took her hands. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." That night, as snow began to fall again, I lay awake thinking of all the women who are taught to endure rather than leave. And I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was. The next morning, I woke before the sun. That happens when you've lived a long life. Your body learns to rise before trouble does. I lay there for a moment, listening. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the faint sound of Emily breathing down the hall. That sound alone told me I'd done the right thing. I found her in the kitchen a little later, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She hadn't touched it. "I didn't sleep," she said without looking up. I know, I replied, taking the chair across from her. Big decisions don't let you rest. She gave a tired smile. I keep wondering if I overreacted. I leaned forward. Let me tell you something I learned too late in life. When someone shows you where you rank in their world, believe them the first time. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. That afternoon, the calls started. First Daniel, then his sister, then a cousin whose name I barely remembered. Each message followed the same script: concern wrapped in accusation, worry mixed with blame. Emily listened to them on speaker at first, until her shoulders began to curl inward again. I reached over and turned the phone off. You don't owe anyone instant access to you, I said, especially not people who benefit from your silence. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. Later that day, a courier arrived with a bouquet of expensive flowers and a note that read, "Let's move past this. Families forgive." Emily stared at it for a long time. They always want to move past it, she said softly, but they never want to talk about it. She handed me the note. My hands shook slightly, not from anger, but from recognition. I'd seen this pattern before, in my own marriage, in my own life. We don't move past wounds, I said. We tend to them, or they fester. That evening, Emily finally told me everything. Not just Christmas, not just the cold, but the little things, the jokes at her expense, the way conversations stopped when she entered the room, the quiet instructions to be flexible, not make scenes, understand how his family is. I kept thinking if I tried harder, they'd accept me, she whispered. I reached for her and pulled her into my arms. Love is not something you earn by shrinking. She cried then, deep, shaking sobs that soaked into my sweater. I held her like I used to when she was small, rocking slightly, letting the truth come out. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone at the table and opened an old drawer. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in years. Letters, documents, notes I'd written to myself back when I was learning the same lesson Emily was learning now. I realized then that this wasn't just about protecting my daughter. It was about ending a cycle. And the next step, one I hadn't planned, but now couldn't ignore, would change the balance of power completely. Because Daniel and his family thought this was a misunderstanding, they had no idea what Emily was about to do next. The hardest choices don't arrive with drama. They come quietly, like a knock you almost ignore. Emily made her decision 3 days later. She didn't announce it with tears or anger. She didn't pace the room or ask for permission. She simply walked into the living room where I was folding laundry and said, "Mom, I'm done." Those 2 words carried more weight than any argument ever could. "I'm not going back," she continued. "Not to that house, not to that family, not to a life where I'm grateful for scraps." I set the towels down and looked at her, really looked. Her face was still tired, but something had shifted. Her spine was straighter, her voice steadier. "What do you need from me?" I asked. she swallowed. I need you to stand with me, even when they say I'm tearing the family apart. I didn't hesitate. I've been standing with you since the night you were born. That afternoon, she sent the message. It was short, clear, calm, no accusations, no explanations beyond what was necessary. She said she needed space, that she would not be returning for now, and that any future conversations would have to include respect. The reply came within minutes, not from Daniel, but from his mother. It was long, polished, filled with phrases like misunderstanding, holiday stress, cultural differences. Not once did it mention Emily's cold hands, or the locked door, or the laughter by the fire. Emily read it once, then set the phone down. I don't feel anything, she said, surprised. Not even anger. That's peace, I told her. It comes after clarity. 2 days later, a lawyer's letter arrived. Daniel wanted to formalize boundaries. He suggested counseling, but only if Emily agreed to return home first. He framed it as concern, responsibility, order. Emily laughed when she read it. A soft, humorless sound. He still thinks he's in charge, she said. That night, we talked long after midnight about finances, about independence, about what starting over really meant. I showed her the folder I'd opened days earlier, old records, proof I'd kept for a rainy day without knowing whose storm it would be. Her eyes widened. You saved all this? I saved it so you wouldn't have to beg anyone, I replied. The next morning, Emily made a call of her own, not to Daniel, not to his family, to someone who could help her stand on her own feet legally, financially, completely. When she hung up, her hands were shaking, but she was smiling. I feel scared, she admitted. Good, I said gently. That means you're stepping into something new. That evening, snow began to fall again, soft, quiet, forgiving. Emily stood by the window and watched it, her reflection steady in the glass. I used to think love meant enduring anything, she said. I joined her. Love means you don't have to. As the lights outside blurred into white, I knew the final reckoning hadn't arrived yet. But it was close. And when it did, the warmth would no longer belong only to those who guarded the fireplace. Some endings don't come with slammed doors or raised voices. Some end the way winter ends, slowly, quietly, without asking permission. The court date arrived in early spring, when the snow had melted, but the air still carried a bite. Emily wore a simple coat and held her head high. No makeup to hide anything. No rehearsed speeches, just truth standing on its own legs. Daniel sat across the room, stiff and composed, flanked by his parents. They looked exactly as they always had, polite smiles, practiced concern, eyes already certain of how things should go. But something was different. Emily wasn't small anymore. When the questions came, she answered calmly. When the old stories were offered about misunderstandings, about sensitive feelings, about how she never said anything, she didn't argue. She simply described that Christmas night: the cold, the locked door, the laughter through the glass. Silence followed, not dramatic silence, not shocked gasps, just the kind that settles when truth has nowhere left to be ignored. The judge listened, asked careful questions, took notes, and then, almost gently, he looked at Daniel and said, "Neglect doesn't always leave bruises." That was the moment I felt something loosen in my chest, something I'd been holding since the night I found my daughter shivering in the dark. The decision was clear, not cruel, just fair. Emily walked out of that building lighter than she'd walked in, not victorious free. Weeks passed, then months. She found her own place, a small apartment with creaky floors and too much sunlight in the mornings. She got a job she enjoyed, made friends who laughed with her, not around her. Slowly, she began to trust her own voice again. One evening, she called me just to say, "Mom, I laughed today." Like really laughed. I closed my eyes when she said it. That night, after I hung up, I sat by my own fireplace and thought about how easily we confuse endurance with love, how often we teach our daughters to be grateful instead of safe, quiet instead of whole. If there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's this: love does not ask you to freeze to prove you belong. Family does not lock the door and call it tradition. And strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers enough. Emily didn't leave empty-handed. She left with herself. And that, my dear, is the warmest thing a mother. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.